Writing is an extremely long process, and it usually takes people at least a year to get from the inception of a book to the polished final draft. When you go through that entire process and get to the end, how do you know that your book is finished? Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. I would say that we all want to finish our book on some level. Even if you really don't want to finish your book because you've read through it for the past 7 years and you're still working on it and you don't actually see the movement of the book anymore, there's part of you that probably still wants to finish it because it's a really long process to get through a book, especially if it's your first book. You have the initial idea, you have your planning, you have your first draft, you have your polishing. And as you go through that process, it actually begins to feel like it's never going to end. And when you near the end of the book, it kind of feels like it's never going to end. So how do you determine when your book is done? I've done an episode in the past on determining whether your ending is a good ending. So if you want to check that out, you can check it out up here or down in the description if you're listening to this on audio. But we're going to jump right into talking about looking at your book more broadly and determining whether you're finished with your book. So, as I've talked about in the past, when you're trying to create anything and determine whether you've done that correctly or finished it in a way that you should, you need to know the function of the different parts of that thing. So when we are looking at a book, when we're looking at a story we are writing, we need to know the different functions of the different parts of the story so that we can determine whether those specific functions have been met. So take the example of a wooden chair to make it a little more clear. There are different pieces of a wooden chair, and each of them serve a very specific purpose in the functioning of that chair. So you have the back of the chair, and the back of the chair isn't even made up of one piece in most cases. It's often made up of a half a dozen to a dozen different pieces depending on the chair. That back part is to hold your back in place if you decide to lean back. And then you have the legs, and there's actually not just the legs, but there's the braces between the legs that allow the legs to stand up without falling apart. Then you have the seat itself. Each of these different parts serves a function. Some of them are put together in a similar way. The legs in the back of the chair sometimes look similar, but they serve a different function, so they're built in a different way. So if we were building a chair and we were trying to determine whether that chair was finished, we'd start with the basic functionality of the chair. Is the chair capable of holding a person up? And then we'd start to make it more refined. We'd start to actually add a bit of comfort to that chair. Is the chair comfortable to sit in? Is it a chair that functions well as a chair? Is it something people want? Is it something people want to look at as well, or something people want to put in their house? Is it something that will stand the test of time? There's a lot of different aspects of what a chair is and how you use it that you have to think about when you're building that chair. And it isn't just whether the chair functions as a chair, because technically I can grab a stump from outside and chuck it in my house, and I can sit on a stump and it'll work just as well as a chair in most cases. But when we are building a good chair, we have to take into account everything from whether the wood is going to be able to hold the person up to whether the person we want to buy it actually wants that chair. So what are the different parts of the story? Well, I'm not going to list them all here, but just to give you an idea of what some of them are, I want to break them into two categories. There are what I consider big parts. These are the parts of the story itself, such as the beginning, the middle, and the end, the characters, the themes you're weaving into the story flow. And there are other parts, the smaller parts, the paragraphs themselves, the grammar, the repetition in the story, the references in the story, the foreshadowing, whether the writing flows from paragraph to paragraph. And we need to approach each of these different areas in a similar way that we approach building a chair. What is the most fundamental aspect of our story? It is the story itself. It is how the story is going to flow. Some might think that the writing is the most important and fundamental part, but I do not think that is the case. Because when you read books, you need a certain level of writing, of course, but that is not what is at the core of what makes the book good or not. I would say if you're going to focus on one thing at the beginning, start with the story, and then you can always figure out how you're going to tell that story through the writing. Now, what is important to remember is that each part of the story has a function. And I actually can't tell you every specific function of every different part of your story because it's dependent on your specific story itself, as well as what you want to do with that story. Some things remain the same. The shape of a story does, how it flows, different structures of the story will remain the same from story to story, but a lot of things change depending on what you do in the story. The best way to explain the agency you have within a story is you being in a fenced area. You stay within that fenced area and you stay within the story, but if you move outside of that area, if you move outside of those boundaries, you're no longer within the realm of story, and you actually need to get back into what a story actually is. So you are directed on a certain path, but you've got a lot of choices you need to make on that path. But the fundamental question you're asking yourself after you get to the end of the story is, what is the function of this part of the story, and have I accomplished that function to the best of my ability? If you can accomplish all the functions of the story and the writing to the best of your ability, you are finished with the book. If you enjoyed this, you're probably wondering how you can support me. Well, you can actually do two simple things. Follow the first link below to grab a copy of my book, and then follow the second link and sign up for my newsletter. It's that simple. Those two things will mean the world to me and give me more time to write books and create content for you. As always, my name is Daniel Poppie, and this is How to Write Good.